In the very first episode of the Clone Wars, Yoda is stranded in a cave with 3 clone troopers. Yoda explains how he sees them as individuals in the Force. Clones you may be, but the Force resides in all life forms. Use it, you can, to quiet your mind. The clones served alongside the Jedi throughout the Clone Wars and got used to the things the Jedi could do. But could they, the clones, ever learn to wield the Force like their Jedi Generals? Any living being is able to tap into the Force. For those deemed Force sensitive, this can not only be a much easier task, but the power could also be greater. This has always been the case, but it wasn't until the first season of Ahsoka that we got a concrete example of someone with no natural gift for the Force being able to find a way to use it. Throughout the series, Sabine Wren has no luck manipulating the Force, and Huyang, an ancient droid that always served the Jedi, informs her she has the lowest aptitude of any Padawan he's ever known. It's not until Sabine needs to tap into the mystical energy field to help another that the pieces start falling into place for her. She's ultimately able to do it. Giving this information alone, the question seems simple. Yeah, the clones are alive, they're sentient, therefore they can learn to use the Force. However, there are a lot of cases where a high metachlorian count causes complications in cloning, both in Legends and in canon. One of my favorite cloning legends is that of Galen Marek, better known as Starkiller. Starkiller was Darth Vader's secret apprentice. When he was killed, Vader planned to clone him to be stronger and more obedient. There were complications in the cloning process that I understand to be based on Starkiller's connection to the Force, and this ruined the majority of the clones. They were deformed and weak. They were unsustainable. Many were driven insane. It seemed only a couple actually turned into acceptable copies of the host. In The Mandalorian, Grogu is hunted for his high metachlorian count. A high-ranking member of the Imperial Remnant, Moff Gideon, wants to use his blood to clone an army of ultra-strong Force sensitives using primarily Gideon's DNA with Grogu's blood and metachlorian count. Pen Pershing, a human clone engineer who has some ties to Kamino, the planet where all the clones for the Clone Wars were created, was in charge of extracting Grogu's DNA. There are reports throughout the series that the clones aren't stable. The high metachlorian count isn't taking. We don't get to see a successful version, if there was going to be one, before the clones are destroyed. We don't get to see a successful version, if there was ever going to be one, before all the clones are destroyed. The mysterious leader of the First Order and master to Kylo Ren, Snoke, was discovered to be a strand cast. Now, a strand cast is a type of clone, where other genes are added to the base template of the donor to produce clones that are intentionally not identical. Strand casting was a risky technology, and the resulting life forms were often flawed and unhealthy. We see on Exegol that there are vats of copies of Snoke, presumably replacements for when the body fails. Snoke was clearly powerful in the Force, but the deformed body and the fact that he was almost entirely a puppet of Palpatine's makes it unclear how powerful he could have been as his own being. Palpatine himself survived death on the second Death Star. To make the longer and more complicated story short, one we will certainly cover in other transmissions, Palpatine survived through consciousness transfer into a clone body. His body was perpetually decaying because of his connection to the dark side. It may have been Palpatine's sheer power and level of evil that did this to his body, but his ideal solution for figuring this out was finding another body with a natural affinity for the Force. There was only one clone of Palpatine that didn't have this deteriorating effect, but it also had no ability in the Force. There's a theory I ran into a couple of times while researching this. Again, this is mostly steeped in legends. It's that a clone of someone with a high metachlorian count causes a double presence in the Force. Now, I don't buy this theory. Firstly, I couldn't find a source on where it originated. And secondly, if the Force is in all living things, there would be problems with cloning in general. Even if it was the amount of metachlorians that would raise a red flag with the Force, having millions of copies of Jango Fett running around would certainly be a problem more than a single Force user, regardless of how strong that user may be. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that a clone decided to go ahead with the training anyway. There would be risks. The clone troopers were all modified to to age twice as fast as a normal human. If a stronger than standard connection to the Force would deteriorate a clone body, the cells that are already aging and breaking down twice as fast would go even faster. As the given clone trooper got stronger with their abilities, the process would logically speed up the decay. There would also be practicality issues of when clones and Jedi would have time to do the training in the midst of a war that greatly reduced the Jedi numbers, even before Order 66, but that's a whole other tangent. The only outright successful Force-sensitive clone I can think of comes from Legends. Luke Skywalker. That is, Luke with 2 U's. This was a clone of the original Luke Skywalker, created by Joris Sabath Kabath, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. He was grown out of the DNA in Skywalker's severed hand. Gabath trained clone Luke, which is just an easier way to differentiate them in audio, in the ways of the Force and used him as an enforcer when he couldn't turn the original Skywalker to the dark side. It looks like at the end of all of this, there isn't a clear cut and dry answer. My conclusion is that if one of the clone troopers underwent the training, they could eventually learn something, but their clone bodies would pay a toll. Make sure you check out this transmission next for more information on the Star Wars universe.